Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the host of Blackhawks Live on WGN Radio and WGN TV sports reporter and a 35-year sports media veteran. Please welcome Chris Boden to the program. Chris, it's great to have you on. How are you?
Good to be back on with you, John. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being here. What's been your reaction to this entire Blackhawks news over the past couple of weeks?
I think like everybody, sadness, shock, disappointment, knowing that, over the course of the years, I built a relationship with some of those people. And it's not a case where you have to say, I think I got to know them, because, I mean, we have all gone back and made certain mistakes in our lives, be it personal, professional. But for the magnitude of this to have come out as it should, and for the courage and bravery of Kyle Beach to finally come forward and share his story with everything that he's been dealing with through the years, knowing that it was a situation that probably could have been safely and properly avoided at the time, despite the focus being on the big picture. I thought there were avenues that they could have taken where, even if it did come out shortly after the Stanley Cup victory, I think people would have been understanding that cachet would have been built, and whether this would have been a great enough distraction to prevent them from winning a Stanley Cup or not. Obviously the wrong steps were taken. It's going to take a long time to correct it and build trust and faith back with a lot of fans in that organization, and rightly so. And all you can do is try and correct the mistakes of the past. And I believe they're trying to do that. They still need to do more based on everything that we're hearing in the public. And as they try to make this as good as possible, but also making sure it doesn't happen again. Even this week, we've seen the trickle-down effect with what's happened in Anaheim with Bob Murray, and the NHL encouraging them, all teams, to come forward if they have any instances that they think, may be cause for concern based on the way things have happened in the past. And let's be honest, I think as much as the NHL wanted to get this right, I still think there were mistakes made in the press conference last week by Gary Bettman and by Bill Daly with how they presented themselves and how they kind of tiptoed through what should have been an all-in, let's dive into this. Yes, we will help anyone who needs help. Talking about this John Doe 2 situation, where the league should have taken even greater ownership, despite what we've just seen here in the past 2 or 3 weeks.
Were you expecting this sort of fallout, like to see Stan Bowman go, to see Joel Quenneville lose his job too?
It's the right thing to happen. I was curious as to whether this current makeup of the hierarchy in the Blackhawks organization, with Danny and Jamie, and the decision to elevate Stan, 11 months ago, to become vice president of hockey operations and to hold that cachet, whether the report found him to be, part of that decision-making process in May of 2010, whether they would have gone ahead and made this tough decision. You heard a lot of people say throughout this investigation, until it was released, anyone who was responsible or turned a blind eye to what should have been done should hold responsibility. And in the end, it was the right thing to do. I was curious to see whether they would go that far, if in fact they learned that Stan was a part of that. But I'm glad for the organization's sake right now, and for that upper management, to make the decision that they did, because it was the correct one. What I would have probably preferred to do is see them do was, when this investigation came out and when, Stan and Al and anyone else was going to be a part of it, my feeling is that they should have put that person on administrative leave, whoever may have been involved in that, and let a Kyle Davidson, in that case, take over in May or June, whenever the lawsuit was announced and the investigation began. Just like I believe the right thing to do back in 2010 would have been to say to Brad Aldrich, okay, these have come against you, these charges have come against you, take a seat here. We can call up a video coach from Rockford. to handle those responsibilities. If it's just a video coach, and granted, I understand that head coaches and video coaches, are pretty much joined at the hip. If they particularly feel that they found the right guy and who knows exactly what to do for them. But in this instance, it's a video coach versus a kid who you invested an 11th overall draft pick in just a couple of years before, and who had just come off a 52-goal season in 68 games in his final year in junior, and then became pro, played 4 games for Rockford, and then was deemed good enough to become a Black Ace. You have all the potential of this kid versus a video coach. And I may be naive, but I'm thinking that you could find another video coach to do at least a good enough job to do what you need to do. And granted, it's a Stanley Cup final, but there had to be a guy in Rockford or someone else, or there could have been a collective, way of making up for what Brad Aldrich, quote unquote, gave them as a video coach in order to move forward. And as a result, there were times in 2011 and 2012 and 2013, we were all saying to ourselves, why can't Kyle Beach's game translate in the NHL? It's exactly what they were looking for. A big dude, 6'3", who could put the puck in the net. We saw that in his final year in junior. And granted, it's not an automatic that they're going to carry that to the NHL. We now know years later some of the things that he was dealing with and the baggage he was dealing with that was obviously a roadblock and a hurdle from him becoming the NHL and reaching the potential that he had in himself as a player.
How do you view the Stanley Cups now?
You know what? Someone asked me that a couple of weeks. Actually, the day it all happened, I did a Zoom with Josh Friedman for the GN Sports segment at 10:30, and he asked me kind of the same question. And I have some stuff from 2010, some memorabilia as a reporter. Champagne bottles from the locker room in Philly. A bunch of pictures that have been framed, and I have a certain level of discomfort keeping them up right now. And I may decide not to keep them up. Maybe I should have taken them down already, but I don't think it diminishes the accomplishment, but it's definitely, a stain on how they got there. And I don't know. I'm just a believer that they could have accomplished what they accomplished while doing the right thing after that Game 4 victory over San Jose at the United Center on whatever it was, May 23rd that year. An hour later, they had that meeting, and I think they could have found a way to do the right thing. But you know what? Not to justify it, but obviously what was said in the report, they were blinded by the run for a Stanley Cup, the desire to have one. That's human nature in some, and I think everyone can understand that to a certain degree. But in retrospect, when you see the damage that it's done and the damage down the road to other individuals, what has occurred here, it's just inexcusable. So how I view the 2010 Cup, it definitely tarnishes it. The guys did what they did on the ice. And, there's still this main question about who knew what when, who was saying what when. It's, certain players' words against, what we saw in the report and what Kyle Beach has to say. And whether there is any discrepancy or covering up in that, I think that has to come clean at some point too.
Chris Boden, here on Sports Talk Chicago. Chris, how surprising was the Jeremy Colliton firing?
Not surprising at all. I think after that game Friday night in Winnipeg, it was definitely time. You were waiting for that first win, which came way too long in the first place. But, you were wondering if they would get a little juice off of that. They ended up playing 2 good periods against Carolina before they completely collapsed in the third period. And granted, Carolina is one of the best teams in the league. But you saw some steps in the right direction for what they needed to do and how they needed to play. And then for them to take a complete step backwards and go back to allowing a goal in the opening minute of a game, allowing a couple of goals in whatever it was, the first 3 or 4 minutes of the game, that's the narrative that we saw for the first 2 weeks of the season when they couldn't buy a victory. And for them to fall back into that, I think, you were making a couple of steps up the foxhole and then you fell right back down. on your backside. So if there was a time to make the move, it was becoming evident through what Jeremy was saying and through the performance on the ice that the messages weren't getting through. They weren't executing on the thing that Jeremy very staunchly defended throughout his 3 years here with his defensive system, the way they needed to play. We only saw flashes of that in spurts during the course of his 3 years here. And that last week, when they finally got that victory, when they played fairly well over Carolina, you were looking to build momentum. For them to take such a huge step backwards, I think the handwriting was on the wall that there was going to be no digging out of it. And it was the right time to do it. Brad, it was a whirlwind for those 48 hours for them to decide what to do with Derek King. Now we're having a week or so where they can get some practices in. As we talk here on Wednesday afternoon, that they have an opportunity to build a little bit of momentum. And they certainly have a chance to do that against the only team below them in the standings, in the Arizona Coyotes, on Friday when they come to the United Center. Then they have a number of days off before they will go on what will be a very challenging road trip. So if they can build some momentum, it seems like there's some positive energy there. They needed to turn the page from them knowing that they weren't able to execute at all what Jeremy was trying to preach, and Jeremy wasn't going to change his ways. Now with Derek King in there and running things at least through the end of the season, we'll see what they can do with it. Obviously the math's not in their favor, but if they just check these things off game by game and can find a way to get a little bit better each and every game. I doubt this is a Craig Berube situation with St. Louis in 2019, but because there are a whole lot of good teams ahead of them already, and it's going to be a difficult challenge. But to make things respectable and to get better game by game, we'll see where this leads. And I think that's the only way that the team is thinking right now.
What's your take on Derek King? How's he commanded the team so far?
Well, so far so good. They seem to get a kick out of him. Certainly a kick to interview. And it's probably what they needed at the time. They probably would have needed any new voice at the time. But I think Kyle Davidson made the right decision in keeping Mark Crawford as kind of a right-hand man, getting a fresh new voice in there. And some of these guys, a lot of these guys have played for Derek King in Rockford. And even some of the Blackhawks veterans may be familiar with him through, different training camp, practices and things like that. But I think that the fresh voice is needed. Let's see if you can get something out of Dylan Strome. It's a fresh start for him and any number of other guys. And the way he's handled it so far, he's a very self-deprecating guy, doesn't take himself too seriously. And that's probably what's needed in that room because, Jeremy was genuine. He stuck to his guns. He was a very serious guy. But when he was first hired 3 years ago, his strength was supposed to be communication. And the message that he was trying to impart on this team with the way he wanted them to play obviously wasn't getting through from an execution perspective. So while some of the guys during the run last year were talking about buying into the system and that worked for that particular team, now a whole bunch of changes are made in the offseason and some of the new guys coming in are having to adjust to a system that they never played. And all of a sudden things are a mad scramble again. So what Derek King's providing, I think he's eventually going to implement some changes. He didn't come in like Jeremy tried to do after Joel and implement a system that a lot of these guys had never played or were very unfamiliar with and took a long time to adapt to, if they ever adapted to it at all. I think Derek King is going to slowly but surely, once this team gets comfortable with him and once they can get some practices under their belt, try to do some tweaks to the system. And hopefully it'll pay off for them defensively a lot better in King's system than it ever did for Jeremy's.
What's the goal for the rest of the season here? Where would you like them to be by season's end after all this that's happened?
Well, that's a tough call. Obviously, the pipe dream is to make some kind of miraculous run and get themselves back in the playoffs. I just don't think that's going to happen. There's too many good teams in front of them. So if they can work their way back to respectability, to a 500 record, the bad part is that the deals made in the offseason sacrifices what probably would have been a real nice first-round draft pick here this year. So that's definitely going to hurt them. We heard Kyle Davidson asked about that specifically when he was available on Sunday morning prior to that game against Nashville. And he said, well, we like to have it. Obviously, it's a great asset to have, but we just can't dwell on it. And as the season goes along, it becomes more and more evident that there's not going to be some miraculous run and the trade deadline comes. Perhaps there are some assets that they can move out. The unfortunate thing is a lot of these veterans that they brought in the offseason, they have multi-year contracts. So if they were able to try and get some, draft assets back, it's going to be very difficult for other teams in the salary cap era to take on these veterans who still have term left on their contract at some pretty decent salary cap hits. So I think from that aspect, what Stan did in the offseason, it hasn't worked. It might not work with the way things are trending. So that's going to end up burning them in terms of, bouncing from one end of the spectrum to the other on, are we doing a rebuild? Are we going half in? Are we going to try and go for it this year? And, from that aspect, it's going to really hurt them from if they want to go back to the rebuild perspective here. But I think there's no doubt whether Kyle Davidson is going to be the guy moving forward here at the end of the season, that's all going to be reevaluated. But if they make things respectable and Kyle is given the full-time job, he'll have to evaluate Derek on his own merit with what he's done this season. If they bring in someone from the outside to, do a complete wash of hockey operations, then anything's left. So I think just to remain competitive, to find a way not to give up, as Marc-Andre Fleury said last night, hey, we're not giving up as many odd man rushes and 2-on-1s. If we don't see so much of what we saw in the first 9 or 10 games of the season, and to remain competitive, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Chris Boden here on Sports Talk Chicago. Chris, how'd you evaluate Justin Fields' performance on Monday?
I loved it. I think it was a great step in the right direction. Now, this doesn't guarantee he's going to Canton in 15 or 20 years by any means, but I think what we're seeing here, especially in the last couple of weeks, is incremental progress. Rough go of it in Tampa Bay. What they had it on their mind, especially with them so vulnerable on the offensive line. They were going to throw the kitchen at the kid. And while there were flashes in that game against Green Bay, 3 weeks ago, put together 2 solid drives. The rest of the day, the offense really didn't put much together. And then he hopefully hit rock bottom in that game. I shouldn't say but they hit rock bottom offensively in that game against Tampa Bay. But then we saw some strides forward against San Francisco. And what I really liked in that game against Pittsburgh is he was much more decisive. He seems to have a better grasp of, what defenses are doing to him, what to look for, who his personnel is, how to make those adjustments. And it was great to see the fourth quarter comeback with the help of a good special teams contest. But when he had the money on the line and all of a sudden he got the ball with 3 minutes left, he marched that team right down the field, maybe even gave Pittsburgh too much time in order to get the ball back and have that go ahead and eventual game winning field goal. But, he got roughed up in the first half of that game, but he made some adjustments. The team made some adjustments. And I think seeing how decisive he was, I think that was a huge step from 2 weeks ago against Tampa Bay to a week ago against San Francisco to Monday night against Pittsburgh. And, with a bye week coming in and a home game against Baltimore, I can't wait to see what happens against the Ravens.
Did the Bears have won that game? Are you concerned about the result, knowing how Fields developed?
Am I concerned about them not winning that game? No, I don't think so. I was kind of disappointed. The defense actually seemed to take a step forward from what they had in that fourth quarter, the second half against San Francisco and what happened against Tampa Bay. But then when Pittsburgh got the ball back, the penalties, everyone's talking about the penalties and, lining up offsides, on that final drive for Pittsburgh, making the mistakes that they did. That seemed to take away the strides that they were able to take against Pittsburgh earlier in that contest. So to me, that's more of a coaching concern. We're seeing some of the same things crop up over and over again, whether it's Matt Nagy, where it's Sean Desai, the game's on the line. How are you lining up in the neutral zone, which is a basic thing that was taught, in Pee Wee and Pop Warner in high school. With a game on the line, how are you making those kinds of mistakes and just handing yardage over to your opponent when it's crunch time? To me, that was the most disappointing thing. And obviously now at 3-6, I think it's going to be a long shot for Matt Nagy and this coaching staff to be back. I think it might be a long shot, failing to make the playoffs if Ryan Pace's career continues as general manager of the Bears. The most disappointing thing in that is that, okay, Matt Nagy was given this final opportunity to do something with a young quarterback. And while we are seeing strides right now, the results have come slowly, and the results from a one loss standpoint are not coming in. Now, if you bring in somebody new, it's going to be a whole new learning curve. 2 systems in 2 seasons that Justin Fields is going to have to learn if someone new comes in. Is that what they're going to have to do? I think that's what they're going to eventually have to do at the end of the season. They're going to have to face up to that. I just feel for Justin Fields and the fact that, he's going to have to set a reset button after his rookie year, when there was so much of an opportunity with what he gained in this first year in one system to move forward. It's not the right system or the right guy, I think, to coach him up when it's all said and done. He's just going to have to live with that, and hopefully the Bears find the right guy, whether it's GM, head coach, or both situations here after this season.
What's your evaluation of Nagy and Pace up to this point?
I think it's time. I think, Ryan Pace in particular, while I like him as a person, there have been flashes of great moves that he's made during the course of his time here, great draft picks, and others that are just simply head scratchers that have been colossal failures in the same way in the free agent market. And to take the gamble that he did with Justin Fields by not shoring up an offensive line to protect the kid. I'm not saying, I think I said this on our last podcast, I was never a real big Charles Leno fan, but at least he answered the bell. He was competent at what he did. I felt the same way about Robert Massey as well. So not to make that investment, to make the gamble that he did in the defensive backfield as well, putting some young guys back there. I think Jalen Johnson's going to be great, but some of the decisions in the defensive backfield heading into this season, I thought were mistakes. There has to be a way to find a balance in your salary cap and your personnel situation. And I think there have been some swings and misses on that. Now, during the course of this, we've learned maybe you got a guy in Larry Borom. Now that he is finally healthy and being thrown out there, I think he's held his own in the couple of starts that he has gotten so far. We don't know what Tevin Jenkins was, but that was obviously a gamble for a kid who had back problems, had never played left tackle in college, and to rely on him coming into training camp to be the guy and take that over. Now, thankfully, they found a guy in Peters who was, you weren't sure whether he was going to be competent at all after not signing on with the team in free agency. But, he's come in and done a fairly decent job, but he's going to be a stopgap. So I think Ryan Pace, kind of protected his backside with that signing after all was said and done once Peters got a couple of games under his legs. But yeah, the consistency of the decision-making with Ryan Pace, he has had a lot of time to do this. And he's had one playoff appearance so far. Same for Matt Nagy. And we haven't seen the needle move forward since that first season in 2018 when Matt Nagy took over. The defense was great, and Matt Nagy did just enough when we were all kind of excited and intrigued on what he was going to be able to do. He wasn't able to get the job done with Mitch Trubisky. And now it's been fits and starts with what we've seen from Justin Fields, but hopefully it's onward and upward. But I'm just a believer, along with many, that it's time for them to make a tough decision and find some new blood here to bring in to management and the head coaching role after this year.
You made a great point too. A new head coach means a new system. So 2 systems in 2 years for a rookie quarterback. I wonder how that's going to affect Justin Fields.
Yeah, and there's going to have to be a whole lot of work. Whoever the Bears hopefully will and do bring in, whether it's late January, there's going to have to be a whole lot of off-season study and a whole lot of, work that needs to be done to familiarize himself with that playbook during all the off-season program and whatnot. So not that I don't think he's capable. It's just slowing down that process for him where, by the end of the season, things are going to become natural for him in this system. And we all know that when new head coaches come in, they may run the same plays, but it's called something different. So everybody being on the same page is going to be a challenge, at least early on, if they do bring somebody in.
Chris Boden, still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Chris, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, your favorite player to interview is who?
Boy, I'm going to have to give me some thought about that. There have been some good ones. Always loved interviewing Mark Grace when he was with the Cubs. Yeah, you're going to have probably ask me to pick one guy, which is going to be a challenge. And I'm kind of, Patrick Sharp, when he was with the Blackhawks, was always a great interview. Nicholas Hjalmarsson was a guy who always shot straight with you, whereas Sharp had more of the sense of humor. Hjalmarsson was more of the straight shooter, but he would tell it like it is. So let's see. I'm probably going to be missing somebody here, and I'll probably have to, once I give it some more thoughts, tweet it out. Once you tweet this out, I'll have my answer on one thing here, and then I'll think of somebody else, and have to do that. But I'm going to say overall, I think Paulie Konerko was the best guy to interview. Always available, always thoughtful. The problem with Paul is you only wanted a 15-second soundbite. That would be a little difficult, but because he would go on and on about something, but you'd always learn something talking to him. Always willing and always intelligent. Had a little bit of sneaky sense of humor. So if I had to pick someone off the top of my head right now, it's Paul Konerko. But once you tweet out the link and I think of somebody else, I'll tweet another name.
Great. Before we finish up today, last question. What's the greatest basketball game you've ever played? Greatest performance for you?
Now you're asking me back in my playing days, which only went to high school. I learned the hard way that there was going to be no basketball career once high school ended. But again, I was fortunate enough to be on a state championship team my junior year over at Luther South, where your dad went, which I found out the first time, right before the first time we podcasted here together. So best game, got to go high school. And even though I wasn't a high scorer or a big contributor, and I don't even, I have to go back, maybe I only scored 4 or 6 points in this particular game, but there was a sectional final my senior year. We were battling, and actually the coach eventually used me off the bench. I was in the starting lineup most of the season, but then he brought a freshman up who replaced me in the lineup as a senior. So I had a little bit of chip on my shoulder, but he thought he'd be better with me running off the bench as a 6th man. So anyway, sectional final, really close game. Actually, we were maybe trailing in the first half. And, I was a down and dirty player. One of my favorite players as a kid growing up was Jerry Sloan. So, scrappy defense, take a charge, do all that. So I didn't even know if I scored any points in this game. If I did, maybe it was 4 or 6 points or something like that. But he put me in, I think maybe midway second quarter. And, I took a couple of charges and got the ball back for us. Packed house, I think it was down at Herscher High School. I can't remember. Maybe it was even Herscher who we played. So it was kind of a real road game. But just coming in, doing some of the small things, picking up a steal, grabbing a rebound, taking a couple of charges. And when you convert on the other end, all of a sudden your team has some momentum. Maybe I hit a couple of buckets and made a few free throws in that game. The stat line wasn't all that impressive, but it was doing kind of the little things that kind of perhaps switched momentum for our team. So that was my senior year. We won state my junior year. So we had a target on our backs our senior year. So we ended up winning that sectional game, went on to the super sectional where we got knocked off by Walter Downing and Providence. That was our big rivalry. We had Walter Downing and Providence. Walter went on to play for DePaul. And I think he's now a teacher in the western suburbs in the Hinsdale School District or something like that. Oh. So it was always back and forth. My entire 4 years, Walter Downing and that Providence team, Luther South, we had Pierre Cooper, unfortunately couldn't play college ball. We had Mike Conley, who ended up, his kid is playing for the Memphis Grizzlies. And he went on to win gold medal in the triple jump in the Olympics and won a state championship all by himself in track and field in 4 events for Luther South. So we ended up losing in that super sectional. That's how my basketball career ended in that super sectional my senior year. And then I tried to play basketball in different leagues as an adult, ended up blowing out my knee and all that stuff. The glory days were over with. So, but that was probably the most memorable one in terms of being able to contribute something to a meaningful win, in what was a pretty important game. Not a great stat line or anything like that, but maybe my teammates and maybe my coach also realized at least I contributed something to that.
Chris, thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure to talk with you, and best wishes for the Blackhawks moving forward, covering them and WGN TV as well. And I'm looking forward to the next time we chat. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Same to all you, everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving. Happy holidays to all you. And yeah, ring me up anytime you want to chat again, Jeff.